to be here this morning. So thank you very much, Anna, for facilitating this opportunity, and for all of you connecting, whether it's morning, afternoon, evening. It's really wonderful to have you all here. And my question, I usually do that with every team or setting that I feel, is to ask about the conflict superpower, and usually is a little bit, what is that all about? Do I have one? So I encourage you to keep reflecting on it all throughout this session. And of course, we're here for a reason together, so it will be my pleasure to work on this together. I will be sharing the screen. There is a PowerPoint, but I promise you it's going to remain interactive. That's the promise to you all. So we were going to be dedicating the next little bit less than 90 minutes to the basics of conflict management, or how to have better conflicts. So I'm glad you joined us really for this purpose. And before we get started, I do want to ask you two questions, actually. I'd like you to raise your hand, because we're such a small setting that I can actually see your hand if you do raise it. Raise your hand if you would like to have more peace of mind when dealing with conflict. Okay. Wonderful. And raise your hand again if you want to have not only more peace of mind, but maybe also see conflict as an opportunity for growth. Okay, wonderful. Good. So you're in the right setting. That's already a good starting point. Now, the question is, so we all have those conflict superpowers, right? Whether we label them as such or not. And in addition to that, there's always opportunities to see what else can we try to maybe work on those conflict management skills. So where are you right now, or where are people right now in this moment? Potentially you're in a team leading position, or in an organization, or in a project lead, and potentially you're spending more time dealing with conflict than actually being able to do your job. Now, statistics actually show that employees spend around 3 hours per week just dealing with conflict in their organization. For managers, the statistics goes up to 40%. So 40% of the time just dealing with internal conflict instead of actually being able to focus on the job. Now, why is that a problem? Well, that is a problem because obviously we're mandated to do our job, right? That's why we were recruited. And we can, as an impact of that, not actually deal with neither our own mission of the job nor the organizational mission. So the problem is that it impacts potentially the effectiveness of what we're trying to do. It can impact the client satisfaction, and ultimately also it can cost a lot of money, and that can jeopardize the whole mission. And perhaps you are already wonderful at in your organization or individually at trying different techniques to approach conflict or to deal with it, but maybe and I will actually move on here. And maybe it feels a bit more like a labyrinth. So we're approaching it, but we're not sure exactly if we're going the right direction, because maybe we don't really have a structured process on how to approach conflict. And the challenge with that is that we may think it is solved, but as a matter of fact, we just scratched the surface, and then it will re-emerge in another area. And unfortunately, we are not really moving on from the conflict. Possibly, we want to run away from conflict because we don't like it. I mean, who likes conflict in the first place, right? So we have, as humans, a wonderful tendency to avoid it, or to minimize it, or to just pretend it doesn't exist. That is a great strategy, and that works for a certain period of time. It can be very beneficial when we try to prioritize harmony in a team or in a setting. And at the same time, again, it may lead to conflict patterns re-emerging elsewhere. So conflict avoidance is a classic one. And at the same time, it really doesn't allow us to dive deeper in solving conflict sustainably. Perhaps also, and this is more the human part, perhaps conflicts can have quite an impact on each one of us emotionally. We can sense it in our bodies. We can feel our stomach pulling together. We can feel our breath getting shorter. We can feel how the heat is increasing. We can see it in others, how physically this is affecting them, how emotionally this can affect people. It can lead to lack of sleep. We go home ruminating about the workday, all the things that could have been solved, should have been solved. Well, the problem with that is that, these are work-related issues, and then we're taking them home. And what ultimately happens then is that actually we start impacting other areas of our life, such as our health, such as our potentially family life, other relationships, and it's really not good. So the emotional cost of not dealing with conflict that it really bears on each one of us is often like the hidden part that we don't really acknowledge. So if this is where you are right now, which we call the cost of inaction, well, where do you want to be? So let's look at it from the moment of, well, ideally, imagine a time where you'd have the tools to actually work with conflict, right? You have a method, you have the right tool for the right type of situation or constellation, and you can use that tool. And then maybe in different situations, you can apply a different tool so that you can actually work effectively on those different situations. And then imagine a time as well where you could feel confident going into these situations instead of avoiding them, because now you've built perhaps certain skills to feel competent to do that. And then also imagine for a moment that instead of wasting that time through conflict, you actually can focus on positive collaboration in the team, in the organization, so that you can actually create value for yourself, but also for the client. And then ultimately envisage where instead of just seeing conflict as an annoying part that we have to deal with, well, imagine we can learn from those experiences and actually build up our own skills and grow from those experiences stronger than we were before. Use them to improve our relationships, use them to improve our organizational agility, right? So that would be something I would like you to encourage you to take that in as a first step to think about. So if this is where you are right now, and this is where we want to be, what can we do? Well, we can actually invest in our conflict management skills, and that's why you're here today, and it's really wonderful. And how are we going to do that? We choose the right action, right? So that we can actually focus on that. And through certain types of interventions, and I'm just going to use the opportunity to briefly add on what Anna already mentioned. My name is Andrea Chakravartti. I'm an accredited mediator. I'm based in Switzerland. I work with clients across Switzerland, but also internationally in different languages. And through different conflict interventions or tools, I support clients, that is corporations or individuals, in finding better ways of dealing with conflict through, for example, mediation and conflict management, a lot of trainings, so in-house trainings for teams, and other types of support, such as even mindfulness interventions to help us improve our decision-making and leadership skills, especially in times of uncertainty, tension, and crisis. I want to tell you a little story about my own approach to conflict management. When I grew up, my dad used to ask me always, do you have a problem or are you the problem? And it took me a good while to understand what he meant by that question. I still keep hearing it sometimes in my head, even now. And from this, do you have a problem or are you the problem? We could sometimes exchange it maybe with the word conflict. Do you have a conflict or are you part of the conflict, right? Or is the conflict maybe internal? So it's something that's been causing me a lot of thought all through my childhood. And I realized at a certain moment that my strategy was conflict avoidance. I was very good at it. It worked fantastic until teenage times, until I realized it doesn't work permanently like that. And so I realized as well that I have to find different ways of approaching that. And for me at the time, one of the best ways to change that was to dive as deep as I could into trying to understand conflict and trying to master it better. So this is where I'm coming from, hence invitation for in your own journey of growth. You can see that it has come a long way and you can do the same. The way we're going to approach conflict management, we have a short period of time today, but the way I usually approach it is think about 3 big pieces that we can dissect conflict management into. One is actually what I would call the mindset, even just trying to understand what is actually conflict. The second part is what methods are around there, what processes, tools, structures, methodologies, what can be used to manage conflict better. And the third part is the message. So now that we have the framework or the tool, the method, and we know what potentially conflict means to us, well, how are we going to communicate that? So that the communication part comes in a lot. For today, we're going to be mainly spending on the method and a little bit also looking at the mindset part. And so, of course, in a first step, the question is, right, what are we trying to achieve? So in a nutshell, we're trying to gain a bit more awareness around what is conflict and what are typical sources of conflict in the work context that you are. Maybe touch on our own conflict behavior, learn some and apply some basic tools and techniques on how to deal more constructively with conflict, and maybe create a plan of action of what you can do after this session today to already improve your conflict management. Good. Now, the framework of how we are together in this small setting and intimate setting, we are being recorded. So what I would like to actually say is, with mindfulness, I would like to mean, let's be mindful of the way we are sharing with each other, also those who will be watching it later, while at the same time allowing for opportunities to have a confidential exchange. There will be breakout sessions, and also you're very welcome if at one point you feel more comfortable putting a question in the chat as a direct message to me, please do that, or to Anna as well. And then we can take it up anonymized later on in the questions, but also being mindful of maybe, our employer and so on. So that's something that I'd like to put. Collective intelligence is one mind, maybe one idea, 2 minds multiplies the knowledge that we have. So my approach is always what is more beneficial, the trainer itself or the whole collective together? Well, it's always the collective together. So do please share as you feel comfortable. Ask questions, because we're small. I think we can do that by hand raise, or if you're comfortable, type in the chat and I will try to pick it up along the way. And bring some curiosity along, which I think by being here, you already did. Wonderful, good. So let's dive for a moment deeper into understanding and deconstructing conflict. If you have a cell phone at hand, which you might have out of politeness switched on, you are welcome to please scan the QR code. Then let's go a step further. You can keep your cell phones out, and since that worked really well, the next part should work as well. You can scan this QR code again, and you can think about the question that you're going to see, which is, what are typical conflict constellations in your organizational context? Is there more in the process of coming in terms of thoughts? Can you give me a thumbs up if you've entered already? All right, super, okay. Very interesting. Thank you for contributing. So in order to actually discuss this a little bit more in depth, and while at the same time to maintain the confidentiality, we're going to put you in breakout rooms. And I'd like you to keep looking at those elements, all of what you're seeing in terms of the typical conflict constellations, and discuss this with your partner. Since we're a small group, you're going to be in constellations of 2. We're going to see each other again in about 4-5 minutes. We're going to call you back to the main floor. Okay, so look at those elements that have been entered and briefly discuss it with your partner. And I think Anna will put you now in a breakout room.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. We have also some newly joiners. And I'm not sure if you can hear us. If you can, you are very welcome to. Hi. to be with us directly. Hi. Welcome.
Hello. Sorry for being late.
No problem. We were just finishing one of the breakout room exercises, and we would like to include you, of course, in the discussion that we're going to have now anyways. And before we're doing that, maybe you want to just introduce yourself super briefly. Where you're based, which organization are you coming from, and what's your conflict superpower? Very important.
My name is Anh Hà. I'm from the Vietnam Initiative for Energy Transition. And together with me today, we have our Executive Director, Ms. Ngô Tú Nhiên. She will have a few words about our organization.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anha. And what is your conflict superpower? Okay, she has an interruption. Hi, ma'am. Good morning.
Không, nó đang hỏi là cái gì? Super cái gì? Contact là cái gì?
Sorry, could you please repeat the question, please? We quite not get it.
Okay. Do you have a specific skill that you really shine when you're doing that in conflict? Like what are you best at when you're in conflict? And it's not a problem. It's maybe a question to think about, and we'll come back to that in a little bit later. Welcome to you all. What we can do at this point is I'm just going to repeat what the question was for those in the breakout rooms, which was basically what is conflict? We looked at that super briefly as a question. And then what are typical conflict constellations in your professional context? What are you typically encountering in your daily professional life? Be that in your office, in your team, in your organization, and so on. And I would love that we share that now in the plenum, what has been discussed, and we can do that in a way that we keep it anonymous, right? To say typically what we seem to encounter, and it doesn't even need to relate to your own organizations, even when you speak with colleagues and so on. So feel free to share this in that manner, because we are recording this session, of course, so we want to find that right balance between confidential sharing and at the same time the ability for others to watch that. So I'm just going to open it up. Maybe one of the groups would like to start just sharing what did you come up with? How did that resonate with you?
I can start.
Sure, Kate.
I think what we shared probably resonated with each other in different jobs or organizations. I guess one of the things we asked, or I asked about, was there a facilitator or a process, and there was still, so that obviously makes it even perhaps more challenging. And then my concern resonated with the other person as well. So I guess it's not uncommon.
Yeah. And what were typical constellations that in your group were discussed, for example, out of what we saw as well?
Sure. Strategic, seeing strategic developments differently, that one, and then partly managing up, might we say.
Yeah, Joelle, I think you were with Kate in the same room. Is there anything that you wish to add on to that?
Yeah, I think, when we talked about some of our examples, one of the things that both those examples had in common is it creates a genuine passion inside. We're not talking about some sort of academic, conflict where we go through a bullet point and just, discuss. You really have this view of what you see as potentially the right way to go. And those views are inevitably not shared by some or potentially all of the people involved in the conversation. And we both picked conversations that had extremely important ramifications for our work experience or organizational direction, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, in one of the cases, we had a facilitator for one of these discussions, and it was mentioned that, you know, this facilitator in this case was particularly talented at pushing the right buttons in the right people at the right time, so that these conflicts could be articulated clearly for everyone, but not necessarily in a way which destroyed the conversation. It kept people curious and engaged. So that was another one of the themes, I guess.
Yeah, Joel, would you mind if I ask you a follow-up question? You mentioned passion.
Sure. I mean,
in the beginning.
I'll give you an example of what passion can look like in real life. In our organization, we're looking at climate action and very specific ways to enact that. But the choices we have in how we do it are huge, and we can't do them all. We have to develop a strategy which focuses on a few of those elements. And if you get one person saying, you know, we think if we do this approach, it's going to have an impact, another person in the room might say, well, that might have a high impact, but ethically, how could you possibly consider partnering up with these people to get that result? You know, it's really serious stuff here. So that's what I mean by passion. You can imagine how the conversation could grow from there, from a passion perspective.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing and for clarifying. Fantastic. Could we maybe hear from the others as well? As you feel comfortable, just unmute yourself and you're welcome to join in. What are typical constellations in your context that you're encountering?
In our group, we actually had very different constellations, which was very funny to see, because I feel the organizations are not that far apart in their development, in the sense that we're both like young organizations, but we had the exact opposite issues, I'd say. Yeah, so we discussed like a hierarchy and like interdepartmental issues, whereas for example in Jules and I organization, like we're fairly horizontal, so this is a lot less of an issue, or it manifests very differently perhaps. They were very interested to hear whether the fact that we were remote, for example, was sort of contributing to some of these issues. We also talked about diversity and sort of how it can bring more problems, but also do away with some of the other problems, or you know, some of the other problems perhaps don't manifest in the same way because you have the diversity. So yeah, it was short, but it touched a lot of points, I guess, our conversation.
Mm-hmm. So if there's no further addition at this point, we can already see there could be a lot of similarities. So shared experiences that we can all relate to, and sometimes also surprises in the way that what we expected might just be very different in other organizations. So obviously every context is potentially unique. And at the same time, when it comes to conflict, there's kind of some universal experiences that seem to come up over and over again, especially in organizations. Usually what we think of when we think about organigrams, right? Charts, we love them, and especially we have some representatives of HR also in this call. We imagine like this beautiful, clean structure, right? And then things are supposed to be clear, lines of reporting, you know, tasks that are being assigned and so on. The problem is we're humans. So the moment we put the human factor in an org chart, well, guess what? It looks probably more, I'm trying to go to the next slide there. It might look like this actually. Smaller or bigger. So this is the real organizational chart. Things are happening all the time, everywhere, and we don't see them, right? All of this is under the surface. So we kind of like to take that analogy that at the end of the day, we're still all humans, and usually in conflict also, we have a little bit our, not always the mature side of us showing up. So that's also normal, right? So let's go to actually the point to say, well, what is conflict then, right? And if you try Googling and searching, you come up with probably 50 different definitions of what could be conflict. And it depends on if you look at international conflicts or, interpersonal ones. I'm proposing you this definition. It's not the only one, and I would probably use some others in different contexts. Maybe one of the most simple ways to understand conflicts is that it's an expressed struggle, somehow expressed, right? Because if it's not expressed, we don't even know about it. So in some shape or the other, it's expressed struggle between interdependent parties, which we've kind of seen in the org chart, over goals which they perceive as incompatible, or resources which they perceive as insufficient. Okay, so for the purpose of, let's say, organizational conflict or conflict in that sense, this is what I'm proposing you as a base definition, base understanding. Wonderful. Now, again, we want to not only understand conflict, but we want to go a step further and say, well, how do we use it better? Right? Because this is what we know already. We've experienced it. We know, yeah, it's there. But then how about taking a new perspective on how we see conflict? So I invite you to have a look at alternative ways of seeing conflict in a broader sense. We're taking a little bit of systemic angle here. And what we could do, time permitting, is do a quick breakout room round, and I will, Anna, if that's okay with you, we could again do 2 people each. Each one will get one definition. So breakout room 1 takes the first definition. You can copy paste it in your own chat, or we can actually do that. Breakout room 2 gets the second one, and I'd like you to look at that with your partner and discuss it for really just a speed round of like, let's say 2 minutes or so. Okay.
Okay.
So this was more of a speed round. And maybe just hearing super briefly from the group in the first room, how that alternative definition resonated with you. Just briefly share your thoughts. Agreeing, disagreeing, maybe surprising.
Just a quick example of, what is not communicated. We've recently discussed or done some preparation for a discussion with a funder who we are going to renew our funding with. And so we had to decide what we thought might be the scope of that conversation. So an example of 2 different choices is, do we just have a conversation about renewing funds so that we can sustain and grow the project that it is currently funding? Or do we also add an additional discussion point to the table, which is, do we also ask if they are interested in funding a different project that we are also currently working on? Sounds super easy, but it took a while to articulate that well amongst everyone so that everyone had a shared understanding. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is not everyone could be in the first meeting. So points were covered, and then we forgot that other people didn't realize that those points had been covered, and so on and so on. So you feel the conflict and the tension growing because of what has not been communicated. So once you clearly articulate, which took a couple of weeks, then people started to feel comfortable. Okay, these ideas are open and transparent. I understand what each idea means, and then we're all on the same page. But didn't start off all, comfortable at the beginning of the process, but once the communication was there, then it became more comfortable and less conflict orientated.
Wonderful. Yeah, sure, Kate.
I didn't actually have an example that came to mind at that point, but I think this is a valid definition in many cases. I was just going to remark that you need a safe environment for people to feel able to express these these things. So, you know, often by definition, or, you know, ideally not a power imbalance, or, you know, a level playing field, or some in smaller groups, or however it is. And it's important, would seem important that they are somehow expressed and encouraged to be expressed. But I guess it can be challenging to do that in many professional settings, and difficult to find that line between someone that needs to express it, and I'm talking maybe about other examples, not necessarily involving myself this time, needing to express it and not wanting to harbour, for want of a better word, gossip, if you like. So, you know, the importance to have a platform to be able to speak safely, and I think that's really important, but hard to achieve. Yeah.
Thank you for that addition. You might think about, there you are, sorry.
I don't know if you can hear us, but we did number 2, and we just thought it was really interesting. It took us a while to understand it, but we took the kind of coexisting in a single space thing to a different angle of, now things are very remote, how kind of conflict can arise, you know, remotely, like through Zoom and things like that. Maybe it links to number 1 of not fully getting the clear picture. Maybe someone's quiet, so they don't speak up, but you might have different contradictory forces that actually don't come to kind of light because of the remote element. And then we also talked about the fact that a diverse team is a real benefit, and how conflict, as you said at the beginning, is an opportunity for growth. So we said it was positive, but maybe the remote angle makes it harder for these things to exist. Yeah, an interesting definition.
Yes, thank you very much, Florence, and your colleague. Sorry.
And my colleague Kaylee.
Kaylee, okay. Wonderful. Thank you, Florence and Kaylee. Thanks for the contribution. Yeah, Kate just left us a little message that you had to leave already. For the others, while you might be thinking about, you know, feel free to either share and unmute. Here, the invitation is really to move away from the classic way of viewing conflict, the way we know it. And so these alternative definitions, and there's a number of them, were actually from one of my own professors and mentors, Kenneth Cloak, who's an absolute icon in the world of international mediation. These are his, so I take no credit for these ones. I give him all the credit. Maybe one of the ones personally that resonates really well with myself, but also with different contexts, is the number 7. So conflict is an opportunity and a request for authenticity, for emotional honesty, acknowledgement, intimacy, empathy, communication, understanding, growth, learning, or for a better relationship. Now, in work context, a lot of these words, we don't use them. Intimacy, empathy has gone a bit more mainstream. You know, all of these things that are very close and intimate, but at the end of the day, this is also it, right? So we have the different ways of looking at what is going on in conflict, sometimes on a very personal level and sometimes on the systemic level. And so you will get those alternative definitions, obviously, in the recording and in the slides. So I want to move on from that in a moment, but simply to bring us back to, you all know the iceberg model, right? And again, here's what it is, like what we see, what we hear about the conflict, right? The upper level presenting the conflict, what we think it is, well, this is never it. And we've seen the iceberg model, all of us probably, in some shape or the other. We have maybe heard about it, but we keep forgetting it when we're in the conflict because we keep seeing what happens on the top. And so, of course, it's very important to keep remembering, hence also the definition and the way of looking at it. What was it that is underneath, actually? There are certain underlying issues on a very, you know, interpersonal level, maybe, or on a purely work-related level. And then we have the trust level, right? All of the things that are more around our deep core values. And then we have also structural issues. structural issues that are no longer only linked to us, or we go to the systemic level. And so, of course, all of this is also happening in organizations. So, okay, Anna, sorry, I wasn't sure if you wanted to mention something.
No, that's
Okay,
fine.
good. Wonderful, perfect. So just keeping that model in mind, right? One of the things, and you've mentioned that and you've experienced that in the way you described earlier on in the conflict constellations, this approach of in a system, and this is in the broadest sense possible that we want to understand that, where the system could be a family, it could be a team, it could be an organization, it could be society, it could be the world. There's always those three elements. There's power, hard power, right? There's regulations, and then there's interests. Now, if we apply that to an organizational level, you have by default a hierarchy. It is a hierarchic power-based system. You have a boss, you have a supervisor, you have I don't know, donors. So this is the fixed system, right? And there's power struggles in that. And that means as well, when there are conflicts arising, we have to solve them differently with different techniques and different interventions than if it's rights-based conflicts. Rights-based in an organizational setting could be you all have rules and regulations and policies and guidelines and work processes, right? These are all things that help us gain role clarity. They help us understand what we're supposed to be doing, what we're entitled to do, or what we're accountable for. Okay, and then we have the third level, the interests. Here it's where it becomes really deeper. Values, different worldviews, beliefs, perspectives, individual needs, and so on and so forth. So there also we need to find different ways of approaching those conflicts. So from here, we want to take a step to the side and close your eyes for, if it's safe for you, unless you're driving or doing something that's not safe for you. I want to invite you to close your eyes actually for a moment, because we're going to look at a little bit on the very individual level, how conflict is actually showing up for us. Okay, so if it's okay with you, close your eyes for a moment. And I'd like you to just think about recent conflict, maybe can be small. Don't think the biggest challenge that you were recently encountering, but think about a recent conflict with another person or another situation. And as vividly as you can, try to remember the following elements. What were your bodily sensations? Where in your body was that conflict showing up? Can you locate it? Maybe some heat, maybe some tension. And then what was your emotional state? Can you label the emotion? Was there maybe anger? Was there frustration? Was there disappointment? Was there hurt? What was there? And then let's go from there to your thoughts. What was the thought that you had in your mind? What is it that your mental pattern was telling you in this moment? Maybe a judgment of the other person, maybe, what was it? And then for a moment, what is it that you did or would have liked to do? What was your action impulse? Okay, you can come back now to the forum. You can open your eyes again. And I'd like you actually to share with us super briefly, what is the action that you did or that you were planning to do? You can just unmute yourself without telling the story, just simply, what did you do or what were you planning to do?
Yeah, well, I can share maybe if it's okay. There is like a difference between first impulse and actually what is actually done. The first impulse is kind of to try to shut down the problem, like to get rid of it, to brush it off somehow, or to say no if there is a request or something. But what I usually developed with time is to let it sit with me, like the situation, not to act right away, just to give it a bit of time. And after a while, actually, the right solution emerges. And that solution usually some kind of win-win. In fact, that's something which comes later, because when I don't act right away, the first emotion, of course, usually anger or some kind of frustration, or I should have done something differently in the past, or kind of this kind of thinking. But I let it pass, and the trick is not to act right away, to kind of let it go away, all these emotions and impulses, and then usually it gets resolved, usually positively. So that's what I could share.
I think for me, it's very similar to what Anna mentioned, the holding yourself in the moment, not reacting in the moment, but just sort of giving it a moment to think and to let things unfold differently.
Yeah. So usually, right, we've heard this before. We have the fight modus with the anger, the rage. We want to go straight back into the fight, solve that thing, right? The fight modus. We have the flight modus. Let me run away. Let me pretend it really doesn't exist. I will go as far as I can from this person or that conflict as I can. Or the freeze. We just pretend, we keep our poker face, right? We might be really hurt or insulted, feel insulted in that moment. We keep our poker face, but actually inside everything is boiling. So these are not new concepts to you, but they are also going on when we think about our conflict behavior. We all have natural tendencies to choose one or the other. And that might be different in different life spheres, by the way. You might at work find yourself in one type of pattern that seems to be in that moment the most adaptive one. But then maybe at home or in private, you might have a completely different conflict behavior. That's also normal, right? And so it's just interesting to keep sometimes observing ourselves through such a mental exercise, sometimes going back even to specific situations that we found difficult, to try to understand actually what is it that's for me going on, because that's the first step, right? So we're trying to get a sense as well of what is my own conflict behavior, to get awareness of that. And also what I call beta, or what we call beta, is what is going on in your body sensations, in your feelings and emotions, in your thoughts, and in your action impulses. When I asked you what was the first thing that you were planning to do, this is the action impulse, right? And by taking this 4-step model, so dissecting it into those B, E, T, and A, is a first step that you can do, each one of you, at any moment, to already get a sense for your own self-awareness on why is this bothering me, what is going on for me, so that actually then only you can take the next step, or not, or wait, right? As Anna said, well, maybe I wait first. So this is a crucial part. Hence, also, if you wonder why in this course on the seminar now on basic conflict management, I haven't yet shared with you a lot of tools and slides and methodologies, because that comes after. If we haven't done the groundwork, whatever we're going to do after is actually not particularly helpful, right? So this is a super important part that you can do whether you are a conflict party. So it's a conflict that's directly affecting you, whether you see a conflict with others, also observing how that might be affecting you and why you want to intervene or not intervene, right? So in any moment you can do that. And it's really, really important to keep that in mind. The emotions, as a super brief escape, we're not going to be spending a lot of time on that. We could do a whole course on that, but it's located in your body. And we feel that in the meetings. He gets red, she gets red ears. I get red ears, by the way, if I am angry, but I'm hiding it behind my hair. So we can see how also in the emotions and then translating into the body language. If we think about communication, just in parentheses, the way we communicate with the world, 95% is non-verbal. Like people remember 5 to 7% of what has been verbally communicated. All the rest is paraverbal or non-verbal. It's our body language, and it's all those voice pitches and other things that come into play. Why? Because our emotions, they're regulating them. We don't really have a good mastery of them, right?
I think Julia has a question or something, a comment.
Yeah, I was wondering about because you were mentioning that such a small part is verbal and our setting is 100% remote. So I was wondering how you think that translates, because some things will be there, things like your voice transmits a lot, but there are a lot of other things that you don't have those cues, right? And that can be both in terms of managing the conflict, that you don't see it coming because you're not getting these cues that are telling you that the other person is perhaps not receiving what you're saying in the best way, or it may make you mismanage the conflict once you're in it because you're not realizing something escalating, or seeing that something is resolving. I don't know. I just think that it adds a sort of layer because a lot of those cues are stripped away.
Thank you, Julia, for the wonderful comment. It's one of the biggest challenges. It's one of the biggest challenges. We're seeing it, we're sensing it, but then we say, but how are we supposed to, as individuals, organizations, and teams, get beyond that? And it's one of the biggest challenges if you put that whole remote and technological aspect to that. And especially if we don't know the people, we don't know how they normally function outside of conflict, maybe, or we've never seen them, or the colleagues, maybe. So it's a real challenge. And equally, what does it tell us of what we can do when we want to intervene in those conflicts? Now, I'm going to come back to that in a moment, but you're absolutely right. We're stripped away as humans of about 95 to 93% of being able to grasp what really is going on in the other person. Even by video, we can maybe get a sense, and we does quite a good job, I will be honest. But maybe it's by email, maybe it's by chat, maybe it's by phone if we're lucky, or maybe it's just transmitted via others. How the whole communication part is a real challenge in how we're able to understand others and the cues that we're getting or not getting. Hence, also the definition of what is not being communicated, right? It's not only about what we say, it's also about all the rest that's going on as humans. There's some models, we will not be going into them, that are related to cognitive therapy, which is actually looking at dissecting those pieces. I will skip over this part because I'd much rather have us move on to looking at practically speaking. Okay, one thing I really would like you to take away from today, and you will get also obviously materials, but again, it's only so much we can do in a short period of time, is a piece of, okay, so now that we've understood a little bit better what conflict is, what it could potentially bring as a challenge to us and a benefit, we want to look at a brief moment for the method. So in every conflict, whether that's work-related or private, and I'm talking here about my own experience as like trying to give you at least 3 or 4 key principles. I probably have a list of 20 of them, but just a few takeaways before you even apply the method, right? Not new to you, but we keep saying that. I have actually a sticker next to my desk so that when I deal with conflict parties, I'm not making assumptions neither. It's so important. So if you want to do something right now that you can do, print that out, make a post-it, put it at your desk. Do not make assumptions. The maximum we can do is maybe offer a guess, right? Okay. Emotions are everywhere. People tell me always, like, I want to learn how to solve conflicts, but I don't want to deal with all the emotional stuff. Oh, fantastic. Welcome to dealing with humans. Emotions are in every conflict. So the question is not, can we ignore them, but how do we work with them? With the awareness of this is happening. The other part is conflict management, right? Does not mean you need to manage it. You, the manager, you, the father, mother, whatever. People bring you sometimes their conflicts as well, and they want you to solve it for them, right? So it's really important that when you find yourself in a conflictual situation, to first start to say, well, what's my role here? Well, why am I feeling that way? But also then, what is my role here? And keep role clarity about what's expected from you in that moment. What is the intention of the other person? And then what's your own intention? Even when you maybe want to get involved in a conflict that you're actually not part of. So that also then means to, how does that impact maybe the setting, or maybe it's a third party that should solve that, right? So all of these are elements that you need to keep in mind. Conflict management does not mean you need to solve everything. Okay, the fourth key principle for today is really, and then out of that, so what is it that we can actually manage? The only part that we can manage, if at all, is the conflict dynamic, not the conflict. So not the outcome. I want to solve it. Yeah, I want to fix it. And not the other person. So the only thing really that we have as a tool available is trying as best as we can to impact positively the conflict dynamic with that curiosity and open mind, and then seeing how hopefully that leads to a better outcome. So if we keep that in mind, this step-by-step process is the most basic process that you probably are already doing. And we're using it equally as in the professional work of mediators and anybody working in complex situations, right? There is a step-by-step process, and one key step is that happens before. One is what happens during, let's say, the conflict or during the conversation, and what happens after. And these are different parts, different phases, different techniques. And for example, even the during conflict conversation or during that part, we could spend a whole week training that part. So I just want to remind you of, as you prepare yourself, that might be in a remote setting, Julia, or it might be in a face-to-face setting, that we always want to dissect those three pieces. What happens before is everything that relates to you. That's your perspective, your feelings, your emotions, your role, all the things. What does that conflict even mean to you? That is your groundwork. That's your homework. Your perspective is your first step. If you haven't done that part, don't think even about going to have a conversation with the other person. We have to do our homework first. What are we expecting from a conversation, even, for example, right? Usually we just go in and see what might happen. Super important. And then the next step is proposing, inviting actually the other person to make that a common problem, a joint problem. Like, I'm feeling this way, I'm having that problem. Would you be open for us to have a conversation? Would you be open? It's different from, for example, sending an email or picking up the phone or just saying like, I want to talk with you about that, right? We have a tendency sometimes when we're enraged to be too direct. We want to open and propose a conversation or a setting. And we want to give the other person as well the ability to reflect about that invitation and say yes or no. Maybe the other person does not want to, and that we need to respect as well. Or maybe the setting is not right. If we have a person say, I want to solve it right, I want to talk to you right now. Well, maybe the other person says, well, I'm not ready for that, right? Just because you thought about it, like, I need a bit of time. So there's different things that are super important in the before part, that if we get that wrong, actually what might happen is we might just escalate the conflict. It might get worse than we thought it is. Okay, so keeping that in mind. During the conversation, there's a structure that is kind of like always the same. The context of why we're here together, right? So setting the context once more about what is the intention, our joint intention here in this conversation together. Why are we here? What are we trying to solve, right? So setting almost like a mission statement for the purpose of that conversation. Yeah. Then what happened, or what is the issue? And then simply asking with openness and listening with openness, what is it? What is it about? But even more importantly is the why, right? The what is the iceberg, the top, and the why is the everything underneath. And that obviously is not a conversation of 5 minutes. And all of these parts, that there's lots of techniques, communication techniques as well, around how we can dive deeper into how do we, through open questions, for example, engage in a conversation that leads to the other person feeling safe enough to express the why I felt hurt, why this was important to me. Because if we don't touch the why, well, we're scratching the surface on the what, and we go back to a superficial solution, right? So the why is very important, but it needs to be a safe space. It needs to be ideally, and we want to create empathy at that moment. There should be a certain sense of calmness. It can be it can also be heated, as long as we keep it in a constructive direction, right? So the why is a super important part. And then ideally, once we've discovered, well, now I understand better why this was important to you. Well, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to move out from here now? Right? And hopefully we find some agreements, and we might also need to agree before we end that conversation, or that whatever it is that we had. How are we communicating to others or not about the conflict, or that we had that conversation? Confidentiality, while maybe balancing your need to inform certain stakeholders, is very important. You need to clarify that during the conversation. Yeah. And after, so there's a little bit the what, how, why, and the context, right? Just as a circle. But afterwards also, you agreed to implement certain things. So now is the time to actually go back to reality and prove that, and build in mechanisms also that you say, well, what if it doesn't work? What are we going to do? We need to evaluate. We need to maybe put on a follow-up meeting, agree already during the conversation, a follow-up meeting that we meet again to see, does it actually work what we agreed? And then in that follow-up meeting, learn from it and hopefully improve it. So there's a whole structure around that, what we can do. But it's really important to go step by step and to not skip a particular step. Right? I want to probably at this point stop the share. And there is obviously lots more we could talk about. I'm conscious of the time as well, that the recording is, or the session is until 10:30, so I want to honor that. What I would like to do, maybe as a speed, combining feedback with sharing insights before we wrap up, is out of the things that we touched upon, what is the one thing you want to take away from today you want to implement? And it could be the smallest thing or the bigger thing. So what's the one takeaway from this training you want to implement in order to have better conflicts? And I'd love to hear from you.
Via chat or orally?
As you feel comfortable. Anything is possible. Chat, orally.
I personally like the structured approach with steps and methods and tools. Actually, curious to exploit to explore it like deeper. That's kind of fascinating.
I also like the process, like Anna was saying. But I think if I had to pick like the one thing that I can like directly apply most immediately, is that conflict management does not mean that I need to manage it. That you need to know what is your role in the conflict, and sometimes you need to step back and just sort of hold the space, or be there but not necessarily solve it.
Thank you, Julia. Now we also see some contributions in the chat. So awareness of feelings and kind of trying to stop that immediate impulsive action. Okay, wonderful. We have already. So coming back to your, I want to just close the loop at this point. I asked you about your conflict superpowers, so don't forget you have them at your disposal. And maybe adding to your portfolio of conflict superpowers, maybe a new tool, right? And that could bring you closer, as Anha said, to see conflict as an opportunity, right? So do what you keep on doing, keep what you do well already. Maybe in different situations, try some new additions. There's a process that you can follow, right? So it gives us confidence to know if I find that difficult, I can follow a step-by-step process. I can actually work on certain skills that I maybe feel less comfortable about, such as communication or dealing with stress management and so on. And then also on the different settings, right? Make small adjustments, whether you do face-to-face, whether that's remote. Just see what comes up for you. And so I will encourage you to please have fun when you have conflict. Conflicts remain so difficulties remain difficulties. They don't go away, they don't become easier, but what we can do is influence our ability to feel more comfortable with them. So I would love that for you all. I don't know if there's any final questions, or Anna, to wrap up at this point, but it was wonderful to be spending the morning with you. Do get in touch if you have any questions as well, or if you need support in your personal or professional situation that you're in. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrea. And that was really a lot of things to think about and to reflect, and maybe to come back with more questions to you. And thanks everyone also for joining, for interesting discussions and insights. We will share as usual the handouts and the link to the recording as we usually do, and feel free to continue with Andrea on a one-to-one basis to discuss further opportunities of this topic. So wishing you a nice continuation of the day, and thanks a lot again to everyone. Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.
Perfect. Bye-bye. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.
You too.
Thank
Bye.